Hey everybody, welcome back to the Print 3D channel. We continue our series of how we 3D print with RepKord filament. And on today's episode, I give you my full review of the Purple Haze PLA, so stick around. Hey everybody, welcome back, and thank you for joining me here for how we 3D print with RepKord filament. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the Purple Haze PLA. And before we go any further, a little disclaimer. This filament was sent to us for free, for review. We weren't compensated in any way for this filament or for the review, except for we got a really cool roll of awesome filament. So once we have that out of the way, let's continue on with what I think is some of the coolest PLA I've ever printed with, the Purple Haze PLA from RepKord. If you watched my unboxing and first print, which you can watch that video here, you saw how cool the filament was right out of the package. We did the bend test, we also did the clip test, and I actually will do that again halfway through the roll, or actually 2/3 of the way through the roll, so you guys can see the consistency of the filament. And as you can see, all the way through 2/3 of the way through the roll, the bend test still is exactly the same as it was when I pulled it out of the package, along with the clip test. So both of those tests prove that this filament is very consistent, in my opinion, as far as density and quality of the actual PLA. The next thing we did in our little unboxing was we printed out Buddy, this little model from Joseph Prucha's standard set of files that come on the SD card that someone hijacked and put up on Thingiverse. And you guys saw that first print, and it turned out awesome. I was already impressed with this Purple Haze filament. I couldn't wait to print more stuff. And that's what I did. I printed out a whole bunch of things. And I printed out my usual suspects when I do my filament testing, as far as what I like to print, because I've seen these models printed before and I know what they're supposed to look like, so I don't like to have any surprises by printing out something I don't know what's going to look like. So the first thing we printed, of course, was my maker coin. And that print turned out awesome. This is a very, very good print. I also enacted the allow gap fill feature, because previously the type for print and channel was outlined. It wasn't filling in the previous version of Simplify 3D. And no matter how I tweaked the settings, I couldn't get it to fill in. So I left it as it was because it still looked cool. But now with the new allow gap fill feature enhancement in Simplify 3D version 4.0, all those little letters filled in really, really nice. And of course, this Purple Haze filament looks awesome on my maker coin. I am really impressed with the print quality. And of course, my gMax did a stellar job on the very first. This is basically our first test model besides Buddy, the little dog, to see really how my dialed in settings, because between Buddy the dog and this print, we've printed a few things on the gMax, and I've dialed in my settings a little bit more. So I was really anxious to see what the Purple Haze filament looked like with my new settings. And of course, the maker coin turned out awesome. I am super happy with the results. The next thing I printed out, of course, is one of my favorite models, and that's Babam from Chaos Cortec. And that print turned out perfect. I am super happy with the results. There is a little bit of stringing, and I did not clean up any of the models as you see them here on camera and in the photos at the end. I left them as is. I didn't pull off any of the strings so you guys could see. This was run out at a temperature of 205 degrees, and we'll talk about temperature in a couple of minutes. But this model actually turned out awesome. I am very happy with the results. That's probably one of the cleanest wick prints I've ever seen on my Babam prints coming off my gMax. And of course, my settings are dialed in, and I know how to handle areas like this. I didn't use multiple processes. We only printed this out at 30 millimeters per second just to make sure that wick would turn out. And I knew the rest of the print would turn out good anyway at that low speed. And like I said, the print looks really, really good. The color is very, very consistent on the Babam print. And of course, the model is awesome from Chaos Cortec. All the models that I used in this testing, I'll put links down in the description so you guys can download and print these yourself if you haven't printed them already. So once Babam had printed and it was successful and I was really happy with the results, the next thing I printed out was the tree frog. And this is a very popular model to do because it's actually kind of a printer test at the same time, because it has a very small footprint. These feet start separately and join up with the body. But the print itself, it turned out awesome. Again, there's a little bit of stringing, and you'll see it here and of course in the close-ups. But the print quality of the Purple Haze filament is awesome. It's very, very consistent color. There were no problems with this print whatsoever. Again, this was at 205 degrees print. And I didn't have any problems with the tree frog except for the stringing. which again could be adjusted with retraction and other settings. But I'm really talking about the color and consistency of the PLA itself, because you're going to get stringing on a lot of models depending on your settings. So I don't think that's a variable that we can count when it comes to filament review. But the print itself, it turned out awesome. I am very happy with the results. It's a very consistent color. And of course, this little tree frog looks awesome in Purple Haze. The next thing I printed out was the lion in HD from Jeff. And of course, this is a very popular model to print. They've actually created a hairy version of this. And this guy turned out great. I am super happy with the results. There was minimal stringing here by the legs. I don't really even see it. I think a little bit fell off. And you can see a little bit of wisping here on the tail. But as far as the consistency of the color of the Purple Haze filament, it is awesome. It's it's got a very good matte finish to it in certain areas, and certain areas may get a little bit glossy. And again, that can be adjusted with temperature, which we'll talk about here in a second. But the print itself, it turned out great. I am really happy with the results. This purple is so awesome on this cool Lions model. It's one of my favorite models to print, and I definitely print these out, definitely with every time I do any kind of filament review, because it's got such good detail and it's a super easy print, but it doesn't have any kind of overhangs or difficult areas to really tax the printer, because we're really just testing the filament. We're not trying to break our printer. We just want to see what the filament looks like. So this is an excellent model for that. After that, I decided I wanted to print something in Vase mode, because I know that this is a semi-translucent filament, the Purple Haze. And I went poking around on Thingiverse, and I really didn't find anything I liked. So I fired up Fusion 360, and I designed this vase for this particular filament review. And I'm calling this the Hookah vase, because it's Purple Haze filament, the 60s, Jimi Hendrix, you get the idea. But this is the Hookah vase, and I'll put the link for this along with all the other models down in the description so you guys can download and print this yourself. And I designed this like I designed all of the vases I've designed previously in Fusion 360, and you can watch a little tutorial here on how I did some of my previous versions. But this print turned out amazing. This is really, really cool filament. It really did the Purple Haze filament justice. You can really see how consistently translucent this is. And when it catches the light, you can see a little bit of the sparkly color. There is a little bit of a glittery, kind of reflective quality to it. But at the same time, it still has that really great translucent quality. And of course, the model turned out awesome. I hadn't printed this before. I designed this specifically for RepKord's Purple Haze filament, the Hookah vase. And of course, the model turned out awesome. I am very happy with the results. The last thing I printed out was a temperature tester. Now, since I had already printed out Buddy the dog during our initial unboxing and first print, I knew that 205 degrees would be okay to print the rest of my models, and that's exactly what I did. I ran everything out at 205 degrees, and we have consistent color. But I thought you guys would like to see a temperature test model so you can see the different variables. And now I'll put up a little chart here, and I'll show you what I did in Simplify 3D here real quick on how you can set this up so you can do a quick temperature test model, which I'll put the link down in the description, with a single process by just using your temperature settings, and you'll be able to print out one of these little temperature testers. So let's do that real quick. Okay, so here we are in Simplify 3D, and here is our temp tower, and I will put the link down in the description so you guys can download and print this one yourself. And you can see it's just a 57-minute print, and this is a little bit slow print too, and I'll show you my process settings. Under speed, we did print this out at 35 millimeters per second, and all my other settings are pretty much straightforward. 0.2 millimeter layer height. We have 0 top layers, 2 bottom layers, 2 perimeters. We are running a brim at 10 outlines just to make sure this guy sits down on the print bed. Obviously no infill, no support. And here under temperature, here's where you want to make your setup for your temperature tower test. And it's really pretty simple. You just add in set points at all these different increments from 1 to 350. Every 50 millimeter, every 50 layers, I should say, at a 0.2 millimeter layer height, and you'll get out a perfect set of temperatures on your temperature tester. It's super easy to do. And then just hit OK, obviously, and hit Prepare to Print, and save it off to your SD card or however you print, and you will have a really good temperature test that you can use for all your filaments. So as you can see, it's super simple to set up the super easy temperature tester. So you can run out, especially if you're using translucent filaments, you kind of want to see what is the optimal temperature to reach the perfect translucent quality to the filament. And since this is semi-translucent, it's not meant to be perfectly translucent like glass, the purple is the main focus of this color. And as you can see with all the different temperatures, now near the top, this was 200, I think, yeah, 200 going down to 195. And I started to get extruder skips, and it started to not really be able to print, and I think the temperature was too low. And that can be a problem. So it's very important that you test that. So my temperatures were drifting between, on all of these models, 205 to 207, and that's my normal drift on the gMax, is about 2 degrees. So I didn't have any problems. But you can see, even between 130 degrees at the very bottom, let me turn this around so you guys can see the numbers. At number 1, we did 230 degrees, and then 5-degree increments going all the way up to the top of the model down to 195, I think was the last temperature. And you can see that 200 drifting into 195 started to have print problems. So it's very important that you test out your filaments like this, especially the translucent ones, because the filament itself on the package is actually rated for 220 degrees. So I knew anything between 10 degrees plus or minus of that number would be okay, and of course we ran ours out at 205 and didn't have any problems. But as soon as that temperature dropped below 200 on my printer, on my gMax, I started to see some issues with under extrusion and the extruder skipping, so I knew you shouldn't really go below that temperature. So the suggested temperature is 220, and we did 230 to 195, and anywhere in that 230 to 205 range, you'll have very consistent color. I really see no variation whatsoever. I know my gMax was holding strong on those temperatures because I actually watched this print. So the suggested temperature of 220 is probably pretty spot on for most printers, as long as you're using a very good hot end. And I have an E3D V6 with a sock on the end, so I don't have any heat creep issues. So you do keep a consistent temperature. But the RepKord filament said 220. And that's the temperatures that we tried to get, was between 205 and 220 was a perfect color consistency on the little temperature tower test. So after that, I knew that all the models that I had printed would still be consistent if I had run those out at 220 degrees. So I was safe to say that the models that I printed at 205 to 207 roughly were accurate representations of what the color would actually produce from the RepKord Purple Haze filament. So all in all, I'm going to give you guys my final thoughts on the RepKord filament. I think this is some of the coolest filament I've ever printed with. I really love the way the lion turned out. It's got a really great matte finish to it. Of course, when we printed Buddy, that looked awesome. It prints really cleanly. There are no real problems with it. You did see a little bit of stringing on my prints, but that's due to settings. PLA isn't normally super stringy. You do get a little bit if your temperatures are off, so it's important to run that temperature test when you're using some new filaments or testing. But all in all, I'd say that the Purple Haze filament is some of the best filament I've used as far as semi-translucent filament. RepKord, you did an amazing job sourcing out this kind of material, and the color is super consistent throughout the models, as you can see, and you'll see in the close-ups and at the end. It's very, very consistent no matter what temperature you use, as long as you stay in that nice little zone. You can see clearly on the temp test that anywhere between 230 and 205 is a safe bet to get consistent color no matter what. The actual filament itself, it really is good filament. It survived the bend test. It took quite a little bit of effort to get it to snap by bending it back and forth. By using the cutters, it's got a nice smooth click to it. It's not a snap like it might be cracking or overly dried out. It's got just enough of that balance of moisture from the actual PLA substance and the dryness of the air, because of course I live in Las Vegas, so it's super dry here. I don't have to worry about my filament getting moisture in it. But the filament itself, it's really good. I actually didn't have any problems with it feeding through the extruder. The little problem I had here, I think had a lot to do with temperature, so I don't think you'll have any problems as far as jams go. Obviously keep your extruders clean when you're using semi-translucent filament, because sometimes it has a tendency to get a little bit stringy like you saw, and you don't want to have any filament jams. But all in all, I would say that the Purple Haze filament is some really great filament. I highly recommend it. RepKord has a lot of cool filament types on his website as far as colors, and we do have the RGB pack, which is right here, and that's going to be the final stage of how we 3D print with RepKord filament. We're going to print out a couple of little models, probably not a big vase like this, but we'll print out some cool stuff, maybe some multi-part prints. so you guys can see what the RGB pack looks like printed too. And that'll be the final phase of the How We 3D Print with RepKord Filament series that we're doing. But my impressions of the Purple Haze Filament is that I highly recommend this filament if you can get your hands on it. It goes pretty quick, it's super popular. It prints really easy at the temperature suggested, plus or minus up to even 10 degrees. I didn't have any extruder jams. All my prints came out super, super clean. The color is super, super consistent. The filament itself, it's very, very consistent as far as the quality of the filament goes. It survived the bend test and the clip test successfully, in my opinion. Those are good tests. I didn't do any strength testing, and I know Tom likes to do strength testing, but this is more of a decorative PLA. I don't think this is something that most people would print parts for printers or any other thing for because it's translucent or semi-translucent. It's more of a art style filament that you would use. Of course, you could use it for whatever you want, but in my opinion, this is some really great filament, and I definitely recommend getting some if you can get your hands on it. Well, that about wraps it up for my final thoughts and review of the Purple Haze PLA filament from RepKord. Definitely get your hands on this filament. I think it goes pretty quick. And stay tuned for our full review of the RGB pack, which will be coming up in a future episode. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, comment, like, and share those videos, and I'll see you guys soon.